The thunder cracked like gunfire across the Montana sky as Alina McAllister pressed her face against the cold window glass, watching four strangers ride through the storm toward her family's ranch. Lightning illuminated their silhouettes, one slumped in his saddle like a broken man, another sitting rigid as death itself, the third moving with the fluid grace of a predator, and the last hunched forward as if carrying the weight of countless souls. She didn't know that by sunrise, one of them would be dead, another would hold her heart, and all their lives would be forever changed by a secret buried beneath the floorboards of her father's study. Chapter 1. The Gathering Storm. 3 weeks earlier, Alina had stood in that same spot, watching her father's coffin disappear into the earth, while vultures, both feathered and human, circled overhead. Patrick McAllister had built his ranch with his own hands, carved it from the unforgiving wilderness with nothing but determination and love for the family he'd brought west. Now he was gone, killed when his horse supposedly spooked and threw him into the ravine, though Alina couldn't shake the feeling that something about his death felt as wrong as a hymn sung in a saloon. "We can't hold this place alone," her youngest sister Margaret had whispered that night, her 16-year-old voice trembling like autumn leaves. "Those men who came by yesterday, they weren't here to offer condolences." Alina had seen them too, 3 hard-faced strangers in expensive suits, their eyes calculating as they surveyed the property like undertakers measuring a corpse. They'd spoken of opportunities and reasonable offers, but their smiles held all the warmth of a winter grave. "We're not selling," Alina had declared, her voice carrying the same steel that had run through their father's veins. At 24, she was the oldest, the one who'd inherited not just her father's green eyes but his stubborn streak wide as the Missouri River. "This land is ours, and it's staying ours." But wanting something and keeping it were two different things entirely. The McAllister sisters, Alina Catherine, Rose and Margaret, might have inherited their father's determination, but they'd also inherited his problems. The ranch was struggling, the banknotes were coming due, and now strange men were lurking around their property like coyotes, waiting for the right moment to strike. It was Catherine who'd suggested the advertisement. At 22, she possessed their mother's practical mind, and had always been the one to find solutions when others saw only problems. "Father always said good men were scarce but not extinct," she'd reasoned, her dark hair catching the lamplight as she bent over the letter she was composing. "If we can't find protection in town, we'll find it elsewhere." The advertisement had been placed in newspapers from Denver to San Francisco. *4 sisters, seeking honorable men to work ranch. Room, board and wages for those willing to protect and serve. Apply by mail. Good character essential. The responses had surprised them all. Letters arrived daily, some from desperate men seeking any work, others from drifters and adventurers drawn by the unusual nature of the request. But 4 letters had stood out from the rest, each written in a different hand, each telling a story of loss and redemption that resonated with their own struggles. The first was from Reverend Samuel Holt, formerly of the First Presbyterian Church of Denver, who wrote with elegant script about seeking a place to serve God away from the temptations that had led to his downfall. He didn't specify what those temptations were, but his references spoke of a man who'd lost his way and desperately wanted to find it again. The second came from a man who signed himself simply as Clay Morrison, his handwriting rough and hurried. He offered no references, no pretty words about character or redemption. Instead he wrote, "I can shoot straight, work hard and ask no questions. Sometimes that's all that matters." The third letter arrived on paper that looked like it had traveled through hell itself, written by someone calling himself Joseph Crow Feather. His words were careful, formal, speaking of military service and skills learned in 2 worlds. Between the lines, Alina sensed a story of a man caught between cultures, belonging fully to neither. The final letter came from Captain William Thorne, late of the Union Army. His penmanship was precise as a military report, but beneath the formal language lay something broken, something that spoke of battles fought and lost, of friends buried, and promises broken. 4 men, 4 stories, 4 chances at redemption, or destruction. "We're taking an awful risk," Rose had murmured as they sealed the letters inviting all 4 to come. At 20 she possessed an artist's soul, and saw beauty in the world that often blinded her to its dangers. "We don't know anything about them really. We don't know anything about the men trying to take our ranch either," Alina had replied. At least these four answered our call honestly. Now watching them approach through the storm, Alina wondered if honesty was enough. The wind howled around the house like a living thing, rattling windows and doors, while rain lashed the earth with almost biblical fury. It seemed fitting somehow that these strangers should arrive in such weather, as if the very sky was announcing that change was coming, whether they wanted it or not. Chapter 2. The strangers. The first to reach the porch was the man she'd seen slumped in his saddle, Reverend Samuel Holt, though he looked nothing like any preacher Alina had ever seen. His clothes were fine enough, cut from good cloth, but they hung on his frame, like garments borrowed from a larger man. His face, once handsome, now bore the pallor of a man who'd spent too many nights seeking solace in a bottle. But his eyes, when they met hers, still held a spark of something, hope perhaps, or desperate determination. "Miss McAllister," he said, removing his hat to reveal graying hair plastered to his skull by the rain. "I'm grateful for your invitation, and I pray I can prove worthy of it." Behind him came the man who moved like a predator, Clay Morrison. He was younger than Alina had expected, perhaps 30, with the kind of lean build that spoke of hard living and harder choices. His face was weathered beyond his years, marked by a scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw, and his eyes held the flat, measuring look of a man accustomed to violence. But when he nodded to her, there was courtesy in the gesture, a remnant of whatever gentleman he might once have been. "Ma'am," he said simply, his voice carrying the soft drawl of the deep South, "I appreciate the shelter." The third man approached with that fluid grace Alina had noticed from the window. Joseph Crow Feather was tall and broad-shouldered, his mixed heritage evident in his features, his father's native blood warring with his mother's European ancestry to create something uniquely striking. He wore the clothes of a white man but moved with the silent step of a hunter, and when he looked at her, Alina felt as if he could see straight through to her soul. "Miss McAllister," he said, his voice cultured and precise, "I am Joseph Crow Feather. Thank you for this opportunity." The last to arrive was the man who'd seemed to carry the weight of the world, Captain William Thorne. He was older than the others, perhaps 40, with silver threading through his dark hair and lines of pain etched deep around his eyes. His military bearing was unmistakable, but there was something broken in his posture, as if invisible wounds were slowly bending him toward the earth. "Miss McAllister," he said, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. "Captain William Thorne, at your service." Alina stepped back to allow them entry, studying each man as he passed. Her sisters gathered behind her, Catherine with her practical assessment, Rose with her romantic curiosity, and Margaret clinging to Alina's arm like a lifeline. These four strangers now stood dripping in their parlor, and Alina realized that whatever came next, their lives would never be the same. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice steady despite the uncertainty churning in her chest, "welcome to the McAllister Ranch. I hope you'll find what you're looking for here." What she didn't say, what she couldn't yet bring herself to voice, was her fear that what they were all looking for might be impossible to find, that some wounds ran too deep for healing, and some sins too dark for redemption. But as lightning illuminated the room, and thunder shook the very foundations of the house, Alina McAllister stood surrounded by 4 broken men and 3 frightened sisters, and for the first time since her father's death, she felt something she'd almost forgotten: hope. Chapter 3. Secrets Beneath the Floorboards. The next morning dawned clear and cold, as if the storm had washed the world clean. Alina rose before the sun, as was her habit, and found Joseph Crow Feather already awake, sitting motionless on the porch steps facing east. He didn't acknowledge her presence, but she could see his lips moving in what she assumed was prayer, though to which gods she couldn't say. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked softly, settling beside him on the steps. "Sleep is a luxury I've forgotten," he replied without turning. "In the war, we learned to rest with one eye open. Some habits die hard." "Which war?" Alina asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. "All of them, it seems." His smile was bitter as winter wind. "I fought for the army against my mother's people, then watched my father's people push west into lands that weren't theirs to take. War has a way of following some men, Miss McAllister. I hope I haven't brought it to your door." Before Alina could respond, the sound of hoofbeats drew their attention to the horizon. 3 riders approached at a leisurely pace, the same well-dressed men who'd come calling after her father's funeral. Alina's heart sank like a stone in deep water. Trouble? Joseph asked, his hand moving instinctively toward the knife at his belt. The worst kind, Alina murmured, rising to her feet. The kind that comes with lawyers and law on its side. The lead rider was a tall, thin man named Harrison Blackwood, who claimed to represent a group of investors interested in developing the territory. His companions were cut from different cloth, hard men with the look of professional killers, though they wore their guns discreetly and spoke with careful politeness. Miss McAllister, Blackwood called out, dismounting with theatrical flourish. I trust you've had time to consider our generous offer. I told you before, Mr. Blackwood, the ranch isn't for sale. But circumstances change, don't they? His smile was sharp as a blade. I understand you've hired some assistants, but 4 drifters won't change the facts, my dear. Your father's debts are coming due, and the bank has been quite clear about their intentions. Alina felt her temper rising like flood water, but before she could respond, a new voice cut through the morning air. I believe the lady asked you to leave. Clay Morrison stood in the doorway, his hand resting casually on his gun butt. Behind him, Alina could see the other men gathering, the Reverend with his Bible clutched tight, Captain Thorne with his military bearing restored by the presence of a clear enemy. Blackwood's eyes narrowed. And you are? Someone who doesn't like uninvited guests, Clay replied, his voice soft as silk and twice as dangerous. The tension stretched like a bowstring, and Alina could feel violence hovering in the air like storm clouds. But then Blackwood laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Well played, Miss McAllister, but hiring gunmen won't solve your problems. The debts are real, and the law is on our side. We'll be back. As the 3 men rode away, Elena felt the weight of inevitability settling on her shoulders. But that night, as she sat in her father's study trying to make sense of his ledgers, she discovered something that changed everything. The floorboard creaked wrong when she stepped on it, and curiosity compelled her to investigate. Beneath the loose board, wrapped in oiled cloth, she found a leather journal and a small cloth bag that clinked with the sound of gold coins. The journal was her father's private record, written in his careful hand, and what Elena read there made her blood run cold. Patrick McAllister had discovered something, a vein of silver ore running beneath their property, rich enough to make them wealthy beyond imagining. But he'd also discovered that Harrison Blackwood already knew about it, had been systematically buying up the surrounding land, waiting for the right moment to force the McAllisters out. The accident that had killed her father suddenly took on a sinister new meaning. Elena sat back on her heels, the journal clutched to her chest, and realized that the stakes were higher than she'd ever imagined. This wasn't just about keeping their home, it was about justice for her father's murder, and protecting a fortune that could change all their lives. But first she had to stay alive long enough to claim it. Chapter 4. The Dance of Hearts. The days that followed fell into an uneasy rhythm, like a dance performed on the edge of a cliff. The 4 men settled into the routine of ranch work, each bringing their own skills and secrets to the daily struggle of survival. Reverend Holt proved surprisingly capable with both horses and scripture, though Elena noticed he worked hardest when his hands shook worst, as if physical labor could drive out whatever demons haunted him. He held evening prayers for anyone who wished to attend, and gradually, even the taciturn Clay Morrison began joining them, standing in the back with his hat in his hands and something like peace in his weathered face. Captain Thorne threw himself into the work of fortifying the ranch, his military mind cataloging every possible weakness and threat. He spoke little of his past, but Elena caught him sometimes staring at nothing, his eyes seeing battles that existed only in memory. Margaret, youngest and most sensitive of the sisters, seemed drawn to his quiet sadness, often bringing him coffee, or simply sitting nearby while he worked, offering the kind of wordless comfort that only the innocent can provide. Joseph Crowfeather moved through his duties like a ghost, appearing wherever he was needed most, disappearing when the work was done. He had a way of understanding the land that spoke to something deeper than learning, as if the earth itself whispered its secrets to him. Rose, with her artist's eye, began sketching him when she thought he wasn't looking, trying to capture the way he seemed to exist in 2 worlds at once. But it was Clay Morrison who surprised Elena most. Beneath his dangerous exterior, she discovered a man of unexpected depth and surprising gentleness. He had a way with the horses that bordered on mystical, and when he thought no one was watching, she'd seen him feeding scraps to the barn cats and speaking softly to them in words too low to hear. "You're not what I expected," she told him one evening, as they worked together in the barn, checking on a mare who was due to foal. "What did you expect?" he asked, his hands gentle as he examined the horse. "A killer," Elena said honestly. "Your letter, the way you write about violence like it's just another tool." Clay was quiet for a long moment, his attention seemingly focused on the mare. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight of old pain. "I've killed men, Miss McAllister, more than I care to count, but I've never murdered anyone, if that's what you're asking. There's a difference though. I'm not sure it matters to the souls of the dead. What happened to make you this way? War happened, and after the war, men who wanted to keep fighting it. I chose the wrong side, defended the wrong cause, and when it was over, I found myself with skills that only suited one kind of life." He looked at her then, his eyes holding depths she was only beginning to fathom. "But maybe, here, I can learn to be something else." Elena felt something shift inside her chest, like a door opening that she hadn't even known was locked. This dangerous man, with his scarred face and violent past, was looking at her with something that might have been hope, and she realized she was looking back with something that might have been love. The moment was shattered by the sound of gunfire. Chapter 5. The Siege. The attack came at dawn, 3 days after Elena's discovery of her father's journal. She woke to the sound of breaking glass and men shouting, and by the time she'd grabbed her father's rifle and made it to the window, the house was already surrounded. Blackwood's men had come in force, a dozen gunmen spread around the property, using the outbuildings for cover. Elena could see muzzle flashes in the pre-dawn darkness, hear the angry buzz of bullets striking wood and stone. "Elena," Catherine's voice came from the hallway, tight with fear. "They've got us pinned down." Elena crawled to her sister's position, keeping low as glass shattered overhead. Through the chaos, she could hear Clay's voice shouting orders, the boom of Captain Thorne's rifle, the Reverend calling out biblical curses that would have made a sailor blush. "Where's Joseph?" Elena asked, noting the absence of the fourth man. "Don't know," Catherine replied, reloading her pistol with hands that shook only slightly. "He disappeared when the shooting started." The battle raged for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. The gunmen had superior numbers, but the McAllisters had superior position and desperation on their side. Elena found herself thinking with crystalline clarity, her shots measured and precise, her father's training in marksmanship serving her well. Then suddenly, the gunfire from the south side of the house ceased. Elena heard shouts of confusion from Blackwood's men, and through the morning mist, she saw shapes moving like ghosts through the trees. Joseph Crowfeather had vanished, not in cowardice but in strategy, circling around to attack the gunmen from behind. He moved through them like death itself, silent and efficient, and Elena realized she was watching a master at work. The tide turned quickly after that. Caught between two forces, their advantage lost, Blackwood's men began to retreat. But as they fell back, Elena saw something that made her blood freeze in her veins. One of the gunmen had little Margaret cornered in the barn, his pistol trained on her terrified face. Elena didn't think. She burst from the house, her rifle forgotten, running toward the barn with her heart hammering against her ribs. She could hear Clay shouting behind her, could see the gunman's finger tightening on the trigger. Time seemed to slow, as she threw herself between the gun and her sister, knowing with perfect clarity that she was about to die, but unable to care about anything except keeping Margaret safe. The shot, when it came, was deafening, but Elena felt no pain, only the sensation of falling, of strong arms catching her, of Clay's voice saying her name like a prayer. The gunman lay dead, brought down by Clay's impossibly fast draw, but his shot had found its mark. Elena looked down to see red spreading across her dress, felt her strength ebbing like water from a broken cup. "Elena, stay with me," Clay was saying, his dangerous composure finally cracking. "Stay with me, damn it." She tried to speak, to tell him about the silver, about her father's journal, about the feelings that had been growing in her heart. But darkness was rising around her like a tide, and all she could do was look into his eyes and hope he understood. Chapter 6. The Truth Revealed. Elena woke to the sound of rain against the windows and the smell of wild flowers. For a moment she thought she might be dreaming, or perhaps dead, but the pain in her side was too real, too immediate for either possibility. "Don't try to move," a gentle voice said. "You've lost a lot of blood." Elena turned her head carefully and found herself looking at Rose, who sat beside the bed with tears streaming down her face. "How long?" Elena asked, her voice barely a whisper. 3 days. We weren't sure you'd wake up. The others, everyone's fine. The Reverend has been praying over you non-stop. Captain Thorne organized our defenses better than any fort. Joseph disappeared again after the fight, but he came back with the sheriff and half the territorial militia, and Clay." Rose's smile was soft and knowing. "He hasn't left your side except when we forced him to eat or sleep. He's downstairs now, but only because Margaret threatened to sit on him if he didn't get some rest." Elena tried to sit up, wincing at the pain. "Rose, I need to tell you something. About Father, about the ranch." "We know," Rose said gently. "We found the journal where you left it. We know about the silver, about what really happened to Father. Blackwood, gone, disappeared in the night with what was left of his men. But Joseph tracked him to Denver, and when the sheriff showed up with the evidence from Father's journal," Rose shrugged. "Some of the territorial judges aren't as corrupt as Blackwood thought." Elena closed her eyes, feeling a weight she'd carried for weeks finally lifting from her shoulders. "So it's over. The immediate danger, yes, but there's still the matter of the mine, and the investors who were backing Blackwood. It's going to be a long fight. We'll manage it," Elena said, and for the first time in months, she actually believed it. That evening, as Elena sat propped up in bed, picking at a bowl of Catherine's soup, Clay finally appeared in her doorway. He looked like he'd aged years in the past few days, his face gaunt with worry and exhaustion. "How are you feeling?" he asked, hovering uncertainly by the door. "Like I've been shot," Elena replied, managing a weak smile. "But alive, thanks to you." Clay moved closer, his usual dangerous grace replaced by something almost tentative. "Elena, I need to tell you something, about who I am, about why I came here." Elena felt her heart skip. "You don't have to." "Yes, I do." He sat heavily in the chair beside her bed, his hands clasped tightly together. "My real name is Clayton Beauregard Morrison. I'm wanted in 3 states for bank robbery, cattle rustling, and accessory to murder. I never meant to stay here, never meant to care about any of this." Elena studied his face, seeing the fear there, not of death or violence, but of her rejection. "And now I'd rather face a hanging judge than leave you." His voice broke slightly. "I love you, Elena McAllister. I know I have no right to. No, I'm the last man who should be saying such things. But Clay," Elena reached out, her fingers finding his. "I love you too." The words hung in the air between them like a bridge, spanning an impossible chasm. Clay stared at her as if she'd just claimed the ability to fly. "You can't mean that. I'm an outlaw, Elena, a killer." "You're a man who threw himself between bullets and an innocent girl. You're a man who worked our land like it was your own, who stood with us when you could have ridden away." Elena's grip on his hand tightened. "Whatever you were before, Clay Morrison, you're not that man anymore. The law might not see it that way. Then we'll face the law together," Elena said simply. "All of us, as a family." Clay's eyes filled with tears. He'd probably been holding back for years. When he leaned forward to kiss her, Elena tasted salt and hope, and the promise of redemption on his lips. Chapter 7. The Storm's End. 6 months later, Elena stood on the porch of the McAllister ranch, watching the sun set over land that now bore the scars of industry alongside its natural beauty. The silver mine was producing steadily, bringing wealth beyond anything her father could have imagined. But more importantly, it had brought security and the means to build something lasting. The legal battles had been complex and bitter, but Joseph Crow Feather had proven as skilled with words as he was with weapons, helping them navigate the territorial courts and federal claims. His mixed heritage, rather than being a disadvantage, had given him insights into both legal systems that proved invaluable. Captain Thorne had accepted an offer to head security for their mining operation, his military experience perfectly suited to managing the rough men who worked the mines. The work seemed to give him purpose, and Elena had noticed that the haunted look in his eyes was gradually being replaced by something like peace. Margaret's gentle presence probably didn't hurt either. The girl had a way of drawing out the best in people, and Elena suspected there might be another wedding in their future. Reverend Holt had built a small church in town, ministering to the miners and their families with a passion born of hard-won wisdom. His hands no longer shook, and his sermons, while perhaps more colorful than those of his predecessors, carried the weight of genuine experience with sin and redemption. "You're thinking too hard again," Clay said, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. His touch still sent shivers through her, even now, 6 months after their quiet wedding in the Reverend's new church. "Just thinking about how much has changed," Elena replied, leaning back against his chest. "A year ago we were 4 frightened girls trying to hold on to a failing ranch. Now you're 4 strong women, running a mining empire," Clay finished. "Though I notice you didn't mention the part about marrying a reformed outlaw." Elena laughed, turning in his arms to face him. "Reformed? Have you met my husband? Yesterday I caught him teaching Margaret how to pick locks. Essential life skills," Clay protested with mock seriousness. "Besides, Rose asked me to show her how to palm cards, and Catherine wants lessons in reading people's tells. You're corrupting my sisters. They're corrupting themselves. I'm just providing technical assistance." Elena was about to reply when a rider appeared on the horizon, spurring his horse hard toward the house. As he drew closer, Elena recognized him as one of Joseph's scouts. "Trouble?" Clay asked, his hand moving instinctively toward his gun. The rider pulled up short, his horse lathered with sweat. "Miss Elena, Mr. Clay, Joseph sent me. There's a federal marshal in town, asking questions. Says he's looking for Clayton Morrison." Elena felt Clay's body tense behind her, felt the old wariness flooding back into him. For a moment she saw the man he'd been when he first arrived. Dangerous, ready to run or fight at a moment's notice. "Clay," she said softly, turning to look him in the eyes, "we knew this might happen. I won't bring trouble to your door, Elena. Not again." "Our door," she corrected firmly. "And if trouble comes, we'll face it together, all of us." As if summoned by her words, her sisters appeared from various parts of the house. Catherine from the kitchen where she'd been going over the mining accounts. Rose from the parlor where she'd been working on a painting. Margaret from the garden where she'd been tending her flowers. Behind them came the 3 other men who'd become family, each ready to stand beside them regardless of the cost. "What's the situation?" Captain Thorne asked, his military bearing reasserting itself. "Federal Marshal," Clay replied, "looking for me." "Well then," Reverend Holt said calmly, "I suppose we'd better go talk to him." "We?" Clay stared at the older man. "Son, you saved my life in more ways than one. You think I'm going to let some badge-wearing bureaucrat undo all the Lord's good work?" The Reverend's smile was beatific and slightly terrifying. "Besides, I've been looking for an opportunity to practice my more persuasive sermons." Joseph stepped forward, his face thoughtful. "There may be another way. The territorial governor owes me a favor, and given what we've contributed to the territory's tax base," he shrugged eloquently. Elena felt hope rising in her chest, but Clay was shaking his head. "I appreciate it, all of you, but I won't hide behind political favors or let you fight battles that are mine to face." "Then don't hide," Elena said, sudden inspiration striking her. "Fight." Everyone turned to look at her, and Elena felt the weight of their attention like a physical thing. "The man they're looking for, Clayton Beauregard Morrison. He doesn't exist anymore," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "That man died the day he chose to stand between bullets and an innocent girl. What they'll find here is Clay Morrison, husband, rancher and pillar of the community." "Elena, no, listen to me, all of you." Elena looked around at these people who'd become her family, these broken souls who'd found healing in each other. "We all came here running from something: poverty, violence, the past. But we didn't just survive, we built something better than what we left behind." She turned to Clay, taking his hands in hers. "You want to face this marshal? Then face him, not as a fugitive, but as the man you've become. Let him see what we see, a good man who's paid for his mistakes and earned his redemption." Clay stared at her for a long moment, and Elena saw the exact instant when he stopped running, when he chose to stand and fight, not with guns but with the truth of who he'd become. "All right," he said quietly. "All right." Epilogue. The heart's true victory. The federal marshal turned out to be a tired-looking man named Davidson, who seemed more interested in closing old cases than pursuing new ones. He listened with professional patience as Clay recounted his story, the war, the bitter years that followed, the choices that had led him down darker paths. But he also listened as Reverend Holt testified to Clay's character, as Captain Thorne spoke of his courage under fire, as Joseph detailed his contributions to the community's welfare. He examined the mining company's books, saw Clay's name listed as a partner rather than an employee, noted the taxes paid and the jobs created. Most of all, he watched Elena stand beside her husband, her chin raised and her eyes blazing with the kind of love that could move mountains or stop bullets. "Mr. Morrison," the marshal said finally, "I won't pretend the charges against you aren't serious, but I also can't ignore the evidence of who you've become. The territorial governor has submitted a formal request for clemency, citing your contributions to the community, and your," he glanced at Elena, "obvious rehabilitation." Clay's hand found Elena's, their fingers intertwining like roots seeking water. "There will be conditions," Davidson continued. "Restitution where possible, community service, regular reports to the territorial authorities, and if you ever so much as steal a chicken." "Understood," Clay said firmly. "Thank you, Marshal. You won't regret this." "I hope not, son. I surely hope not." That night, as Elena lay in Clay's arms listening to the wind sing through the prairie grass, she thought about the strange journey that had brought them all to this place. 4 sisters who'd lost their father, 4 men who'd lost their way, and somehow, in the vast emptiness of the frontier they'd found each other. "Do you ever regret it?" Clay asked softly. "Marrying an outlaw, taking on all this trouble?" Elena turned to look at him, seeing in his face the boy he must have been before war and hardship carved away his innocence, seeing too the man he'd chosen to become despite it all. "Never," she said, sealing the word with a kiss. "Love doesn't ask where you've been, Clay Morrison. It only cares where you're going." Outside, a summer storm was building on the horizon, lightning dancing between the clouds like celestial fireworks. But inside the house that Patrick McAllister had built with his own hands, 8 hearts beat in harmony, proving that sometimes the strongest fortress isn't made of wood and stone but of love, trust, and the willingness to fight for something better than what came before. In the end, Elena reflected as sleep finally claimed her. It wasn't the strongest who survived the storms of life. It wasn't the richest or the smartest, or even the most skilled with a gun. It was the ones with the truest hearts. The ones who understood that love, real love, wasn't just a feeling but a choice, made new each day, to stand beside another soul no matter what storms might come. And in that choice, in that daily act of courage, lay the only victory that truly mattered. The frontier was vast and unforgiving, but love was infinite. Love transcended all boundaries of law and custom, of past and future, of fear and hope. It transformed outlaws into protectors, strangers into family, a failing ranch into a thriving empire. Most of all, it transformed 4 frightened girls and 4 broken men into something greater than the sum of their parts, a family bound not by blood, but by choice, strong enough to weather any storm and brave enough to build something beautiful in the wilderness of the human heart.